I'm excited today to walk you through a live case. So how today is going to work is that I'm going to play the role of the interviewer. So I'll be giving the case to our guest who you'll meet in a few seconds. And as we proceed to the case, there will be breaks in the case where I'm going to give you time as the audience watching this to solve the case on your own as well. So I actually will give you more time, almost twice as much time as you normally get in the interview to prepare, because for many of you, this is the first time you're seeing a case. So I want to give you that space. And then we're going to have our My Consulting Offer alumnus go through. She was just in your shoes literally a few months ago before she got her offer, and she'll introduce herself in a bit. So you'll get to know her background, and she'll walk through the case with me. And this is the first time she's seeing the case. So like you, this is the first time that we're all going to walk through this together. So we're going to go see what a live case looks like, and I'll provide coaching throughout. So how to take your answer from what you might have about you're watching this to an exceptional answer by the end of this session. Awesome. John, you're super awesome. So I will let you lead it from here. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. Nice to be here today. My name is Moshan, and I'm a current senior studying evolutionary biology at 𝗙𝗲𝗲 University. Like Davis said, I was just in your shoes a couple months ago. I was really worried about not being able to land a consulting job offer because of quite a few reasons, actually. You know, I had a lack of a business background. I didn't have a relevant major, as you can see. My GPA was non-competitive, and I made that transition really late into consulting from previously pre-med. And one really important thing was that the COVID-19 pandemic just hit, and so it really worsened my chances of landing a full-time job. But I'm really happy because with the help of MCO, I was able to land an offer as an incoming analyst at a media and entertainment consulting firm called On-Prem Solution Partners. So I'll be starting there this coming fall. And currently, I'm also serving as an English tutor on an education service platform called 𝗙𝗲𝗲𝗥𝗲𝗀. And I'm also in my school's all-female metric a cappella group named Metritones as a mezzo soprano. So yeah.
Awesome. First off, amazing introduction. We did not rehearse that. So you made my day with your compliments on my consulting offer there. So thank you so much. And second, now I know what I'm doing after this is I'm literally going to Google your group and find you singing in the last year. So I am so excited for that. With that, I'm excited to get started. So our case today is actually a really fun one that I love. So our client today, called them Lazy Fitness Corp, is a US healthcare company, and they specialize in fitness supplements and drugs. So as you know, during COVID-19, a lot of gyms are either at minimum capacity or they've closed entirely, and not everyone has access to a home gym. So what our client wants to do is that they've been developing a FDA approved drug that they'll need to go through the FDA process that will allow you to take a pill. And this pill will give you all the benefits of working out, roughly about an hour of intense workout, but you don't have the side effects, such as, for example, you don't need the recovery time in between, and you're not prone to injuries that you would be at the gym. So they call this the lazy pill. And they're thinking about pricing it around the same price as you would a multivitamin. So the question that the client has for us today is that should they continue to develop the lazy pill and to launch it in the US? And what I want you to do here is to take 30 seconds to think about what kind of questions you would ask. And I'm going to leave the prompt on the right-hand side about what makes an exceptional opening. So Moshan, obviously she's a pro at this point, so she's already ready, but take your time already for anyone who is sitting at home. All right, 10 seconds, 5 seconds. All right, time. All right, so as you might have noticed if you're watching from our screens, which I've literally took 5 seconds to do this, but you could take more time to do this as well. You'll get to the 5-second mark. All right, now what do you have for us? So okay, so we'll role play this now, and then we'll go through how she would normally do an opening. Great, so that's the prompt. Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, so just to make sure that, I got everything down and that I understand the prompt correctly, our client is 𝗙𝗲𝗲, a healthcare company that recently produced a fitness supplement named the Lazy Pill. And basically, they're trying to see whether or not they want to continue developing this product, get it FDA approved, and launch it in the US. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Got it. So before I go ahead and structure my thoughts about this, I'd like to ask a couple of clarifying questions. But the first question that I really have is, as a pre-med student, I am familiar with the FDA, but I'm actually not quite familiar with how the FDA approval process works. So I'd like to actually ask you about how this process is operated.
Absolutely. So the way that the FDA process works, so the FDA is, as you know, is a governing process. So every drug that needs to, like the COVID vaccine, has to go through an approval process, because you can't just launch a drug and then put needles into people. So you have to go through a process. This includes a lot of pills as well for health, nutrition, and so forth, similar to the Lazy Pill. And so how the FDA does this is they do it through trial basis in 3 phases. For the case, you don't need to know the particulars, but they need to pass through 3 processes. And what's important to know is that you need to have a product that's ready for FDA approval process. And in this case, our client right now has a product in place that they need to work on to get to FDA approval process. And once we start the trial, there will be other things that they need to do to gain approval. So think of it as a governing body for getting your drugs and your supplements approved for general marketing in the US. So many drugs, if they don't have an FDA approved process, then your company is not allowed to sell it in the US.
Okay, understood. All right. So, and then my next question would be pertaining to this particular product, this Lazy Pill. So I understand that this is a pill that Lazy Fitness has developed, but I'm curious to know whether or not this is a niche product. Has other companies perhaps launched similar products that serve similar purposes?
Good question. So right now, we there are others who want to do this, but we believe we're the closest to market to when no one has currently asked for FDA approval process. So if we launch, assuming no everyone speeds the process up, we'd be the only one to market.
Got it. So we're really kind of the first company to ever launch a product like this. Great. So I just wanted to end off with my last question regarding our client's kind of metric of success. I understand that they want to further develop this product and launch in the U.S. But what objectives do they have in mind, and is there like a particular time frame that they're looking for?
Yeah, so there's 2 timeframes that we're looking at right now. One is that they want to be able to break even, so break money within 4 years of it. So 48 months if you're counting by months. But they also want to be able to clear the FDA within 24 months.
Got it. Okay. So just to reiterate, they're trying to both break even within 4 years and also gain the entire FDA approval process, which is all 3 phases within 24 months, which would be 2 years.
That's
Got
correct.
it. Great. Okay. So, after I've kind of asked all of my clarifying questions, I would then want to proceed into the next step, which is kind of structuring my thoughts.
Awesome. Again, so for anyone watching here, this is the first time that Moshan is actually seeing this prompt for the first time. So she is doing exceptionally well. So what I want to do here is take a second to provide for you, as well as Moshan, what you did really well. So it's funny that you mentioned you haven't cased since getting your offer, but you are already exceptionally amazing. So let's talk about the things that she did really well. I'm going to clarify some of these as well. Is the first thing is that she clarified to make sure that there is a clear recap here. So she made sure that we're working on the right fact, right? That this is a healthcare company, Lazy Pill, and we're trying to launch this product and to be able to launch it in the US market. And as the interviewer, I basically said, yep, that's correct. I want to make sure that she has all the facts. So this is an exceptional recap, what she did here. The thing that she could have done was to be more succinct on it. But again, it's saving you 5 seconds versus like the entire case. So totally okay. If for anyone who's like going from an A to an A plus, those 5 seconds could matter for you over time. But in this case, the recap was done phenomenally. So well done. You're already on the track to asking it. The second thing is she didn't ask this until the end, but she asked the success metric, which I gave to her, which is that we want to be able to launch the drug, which is get FDA process within 24 months and be able to break even without 48. So the thing here is that the success metric, you could put it at the end or put it in the middle. I traditionally like to put it in the middle. The reason being is that if you could rewind this and watch it, but Moshan said, I only have one last question for you, but that kind of ties her hand because it's kind of like if the interviewer says, great, so we need to be able to hit this. I'm gonna make this up here, is that we need to be able to hit this CAGR within this certain month, and we need to be able to hit this COGS by this time period, and you don't know what a COG is, or you don't know what a CAGR is, then you're kind of stuck because you said, oh, that was my last question. So it's totally okay not to say last question, but if you do say last question, usually what I like to do is not use it for the success metric, because then again, most of the time the success metric will be very straightforward, but you don't want that one time where they want the annual compounded growth rate to be a certain percent, and you're like, well, how do you calculate the annual compounded growth rate? So I wanted to keep in mind, but in this case, she did a phenomenal job, and very confidently, the last question gave her the right solution here. And the clarifying questions were amazing. So she kind of solved all these clarifying questions already, which was that she asked what the FDA process was like, as well as how to make it go through. So she was able to answer more about the product as well as the FDA process. Another thing that she could have asked us for in this case was the side effects. But again, this is not needed right now because you can ask it later in the case when we talk about the product and the analysis. But one thing you can also ask is like the side effects. Like, for example, does it work for every single age group? So in this case, for example, our pill doesn't work for anyone who's 21 or under. So it only works for if you're 21 years old or over. And this could be information that you use later on. So when you think about the clarifying questions, you don't have to hit all of them because you can have a time to ask it during the case. But Moshan did a fantastic job asking the main one, which is about our product and how the FDA process works. There's also other things that you can also ask in order to be above the bar. So what I mean by above the bar, and you'll see this throughout the case, is that above the bar means that these are like your super exceptional casers, and they are people who you would give an offer to almost instantly because they are asking like these types of things. It doesn't mean that you have to ask these questions to get the offer, but it means that you tend to favor the candidates who ask these questions because they're thinking beyond just what is in front of them. So a couple of things you can ask, for example, is that does the FDA require a prescription to get lazy pill? Because this can help later on with the objective of, yes, the FDA approves it, but if you have to go to a prescription, then you might have to train doctors to how to give the medicine, which delays your break-even time, which is our second objective. So again, these are things that you could be learned later on in the case, but you don't have to do it now. Other questions could include, how long does it take to do the FDA approval process? So in this case, it takes anywhere from 4 months to as long as 40 years. So very, very wide range. And you can ask, my two favorite types of questions is us challenging the objectives, which means that how flexible are they? For example, why 48 months? Like, where did that come from? Can it be 49 months? If we find it announced it's 49 months, will the client do it? Or if it comes out, wait, we can actually break even, but it'll take 50 months, but we'll make a lot of profits. Is the client okay with that? So I always like to challenge the success metrics. In this case, it's 48 months to break even because that's the number that their finance team needs to approve this project to continue to move forward. And then I also like to challenge the location as well, if it's possible, which is the client committed to launching in the US? Like, maybe why the US, right? So you want to be able to help people, because if people are saying that they're going to launch in the US, you want to know how much flexibility is. Like, we could examine the case. And for example, let's say that launching in another country makes a lot more sense. So these are things that are above the bar. Again, you don't have to ask these questions, but for those of you who are already casing, you should build a rhythm that eventually you want to get to this point. It means that you're exceptional with the opening. Again, above the bar, focus on getting to the bar first, and then we'll talk about the exceptional. In this case, Moshan did a fantastic job with this. What I'd like to do now is actually to have you go through and to take 2 minutes to practice building a structure. So again, 2 minutes is a lot of time for the structures on the higher end. But what we're going to do here is, for many of you who are seeing a structure for the first time, take 2 minutes to go through it. All right, we're at the 30-second mark, so you have a minute and a half left. All right, you have a minute. For those of you who are advanced at casing at this point, you should have had a structure and so forth. You might feel like, well, this is a lot of time, Davis. I was like, yes. But for those of you who are like, Davis, this is not enough time. I promise you, you'll get there with a lot more practice in terms of getting your structure down. All right, we're at 90 seconds. So you have 30 seconds left. Okay, 10 seconds. All right, 2 minutes. Okay. All right, Moshan, I will have you present what you have to the structure. So client wants to know, how are you going to approach this?
Yeah, great. So I really like to kind of separate my thoughts into 4 different buckets. The first one, and I really want to prioritize answering kind of our client's main question, which is, will this be a something that we can be able to break even within 4 years? And so in terms of my first bucket, which is financials, I'd like to look at our expected revenue within the 4 years and our expected cost within the next 4 years, and really kind of determine what the break-even point is for our product. And in terms of revenue, specifically what I'm thinking about is how will we sell this product, right? Will we get additional funding? Will we be able to kind of roll out the products, and where are we going to roll out? What platforms? Are these going to be physical retail stores or kind of pharmacies? So considerations such as that. In terms of costs, I'm thinking of both kind of costs for research and development, and also other costs, including raw materials and equipment. And then moving on to my second bucket would be analyzing the market. So I'd really like to look at both the demand and the supply for this product. We previously talked about how, in terms of supply, how we're predicted to be kind of the first company to launch a product like this. But I'm curious to know whether or not we might face potential competition from other companies. And then in terms of the demand for this product, who's really looking to buy a product like this? So that would be my main concern, and just being able to understand the customer demographics that we're targeting. And then moving on to my third bucket is for the client. And I really want to know, in terms of our client, this company that we're working for, what's their expertise in terms of developing this product, and also whether or not they have the proper kind of skills and research kind of planned in order to actually make this into a possibility. So I know I said 4 buckets, but actually I shortened it into 3 buckets just because I feel like it might be more efficient that way. But yeah, so that's what I would have so far. And just to reiterate, I'd like to start with the financials first, just to figure out the break-even point, to make sure to answer the question of whether or not this is going to be a meaningful kind of undergo. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Moshan. So in this case, John did a fantastic job with this. So let's talk about we'll talk about what she did really well when you can see it. But you see here, there's a couple of things I want to highlight for anyone who's watching does it really well. First off is that she addressed the key issue here, which is, can we break even within 4 years? And her first bucket, which is around the financials. The second is like the market. So as you remember from the opening, we're considering the US, but there's potentially other markets as well. So she tackled that directly on in her second bucket. And then third is the expertise with, can we actually get this product to launch? So even though she doesn't say the FDA word particularly, it's going through the FDA process. So those 3 buckets are fantastic for answering the case. And using these, you'll see when we do the analysis, this would have been a structure that you could have used to answer the case. And what I also love is that she started with 4, but notice how consultants are very flexible to knowing that they can improve their process. So notice how she started with saying, I'm going to start with 4 buckets, but really after looking at it, I'm just going to consolidate these into 3. So amazing job there. And of course, she's also seeing this for the first time. So it's similarly is that when you see a case for the first time, it's totally okay for you to start with more buckets or less buckets and then customize. Like earlier, I said I would have 4, but now I'm actually 3 because I think it'd be more succinct to be able to do this. And this shows that you're flexible because as this case goes on, you're going to be presenting with new information that's going to tie back to the structure, and being able to be flexible with how you move your structure forward, it's going to help you demonstrate that as a consultant, you would be able to do the same thing for the client. Because if new information comes to your desk as a consultant and you don't adjust your models and you don't adjust your structure to it, then you aren't doing a great job of being a consultant. This is a great job. This is actually similar to a structure that I had. So in this case, you have 3 buckets. In this case, I had 4, but very similar. We'll talk about what this is. But you'll see here that I did the same thing you did, which is you started with the 48 months to break even, which is the profitability. You want to know the revenues and so forth and the markets here. So you can see that Moshan had 2 of the buckets I already had, which is the profitability. She called it the financials, which is totally same, good. And then the market dynamics, which feeds into this 48. And then her bucket is 1 bucket for just the product and the approval expertise in general. I broke it up into 2 parts, which is what do we need to do to get it to where we can submit it to the FDA, and what do we need to do to break it up to future FDA. Again, you could do it both ways, put it into 1 bucket. In this case, for me, I did it before FDA and during FDA. And then of course, this part you can see is almost like after FDA, but there's a lot of ways for you to structure it. So let's talk about, so this is one of the frameworks taken from one of the books here, which is just one of your standard ones where it just talks about profit, competitors, product, time. So what's wrong here? Well, 1, it's not easy because it doesn't tackle our main question. It's not deep. It's only 2 levels. 3, it's not customized. You can apply this to anything. Like, again, this can be like the bubble tea market, right? How much profit does our bubble tea fight? How much time does it take for us to launch new bubble tea products? What are our competitors in the market, and what is our products? So you can apply this to the bubble tea, which is a failure. It's not customized. Again, you can apply it, and it's not hypothesis driven. It's not really saying what is this answering or what is this not answering. Versus like Moshan's framework, which is say, can we break even within 48 months, 4 years? So you have to tie it back to a hypothesis here. So the question here that we're going to answer is that, so the client wants to know, well, Moshan, one of the things you wanted to talk about was the market dynamics. So we actually want to know, how big is the size of the US market? And so what I want you to do here is take 2 minutes to figure out and lay out an approach. So usually in a market sizing, you have much less time than 2 minutes to lay it out. But in this case, for anyone, feel free to lay out, go through these 6 steps and figure out how you would do it. The market sizing, I find, is one of my favorite ones to exercise because it really teaches you how to structure approach, how to do math, how to work on your synthesis, how to work on your communication skills as well. So like one of those things where if you're short on time and you do market sizing, you're going to improve in so many different areas. All right, so we're approaching 45 seconds here. So continue to take time here. And when you're practicing, one of the things that we consider is that if you want to print this out, take a screenshot of this here is the steps 1 through 6. Go ahead and do so. It really helps you. But in an interview, obviously you can't take this in. But once you go through these steps, you'll find it's very easy for you to be able to approach it here. So I'll take another minute to go through. We have about a minute here to go through. And right now, if you're still thinking, well, Davis, it's a minute in, I haven't even thought about my structure, we have a couple of resources we'll send to you as well to help you with the market sizing. Or at this point, you're annoyed by my voice, just feel free to hit the pause and time yourself for 2 minutes. All right, 15 seconds. All right. So let's see how Moshan was able to do. So great. So how would you size the market for the US market?
Yeah, so I'd like to take a top-down approach by starting with the general US population. Um, and then from there, figure out specifically what demographic we're looking at, right, in terms of age. So, and then after that, I would further kind of segment down and see how often people would take these pills. I did see in one of the previous slides that this pill can only be taken once per day, that I do want to verify with you. And once I figure that out, I also want to figure out how much we're charging for this pill, right? We said that it costs the same as a multivitamin, but I'm curious to see whether or not these pills are sold individually or kind of in bottles. And so that would change the dynamic a little bit. So those are all questions that I would want to look at. Starting with the US population, I'm going to roughly round that to 300 million people in the US. And then separate that into 4 different segments, age segments, right? We have ages 0 to 21, so from newborns to 21-year-olds, and then from 22 to 43-year-olds, from 44 to 65-year-olds, and from 66 to 87-year-olds. And 87-year-olds are kind of the maximum age that I'm working with in this framework. We've mentioned before that the newborns all the way to the 21-year-olds cannot take this pill. And so I'm going to automatically assume that there will be 0% from this group taking the pill. I would also assume that, especially for the older population, the ages 66 to 87, that perhaps, they do want to get some exercise in, but perhaps not kind of, through the means of taking an oral pill. So if anything, I'd estimate that into around like 10% of that group. And then the 2 middle groups, which are the 22 to 43-year-olds and the 44 to 65-year-olds, I would assume that roughly like 50% of each group would be willing to take this pill. So kind of just clarifying my math a little bit, each age segment takes up around 25% of 300 million, which is 75 million people. And then going forwards, we have 0% for the 0 to 21, so that's 0% for that segment entirely. We have 51% for the next segment. Sorry, not 50% for the next segment, and that segment is 75 million people. So I'm just going to do a quick calculation here, actually just figure out what 50% of 75 is, if you don't mind. So then that gives me so, okay, so that would be 2, and then 3, sorry, and then, okay, that would be roughly like 38. Would you be fine if I rounded my numbers a little bit?
Yeah, go for it. Absolutely.
Great. Okay, so that would be roughly like 38 million people. And then the same would apply for the next segment, which is the 44 to 65-year-old. So another 38 million. And then the last segment, we have 10% of this segment would be taking the pill. So 10% times the 25% would be kind of, roughly speaking, 3%, right? So, and then I would take 3% of 3% of the 300 million people, which is roughly 9 million people. So let me just double check that. Yeah, so 1% would be 3, and then 3 times 3 would be 9. Great. So then in total, we would have these 3 segments adding up. So that would be 38 million plus another 38 million plus another 9 million. That gives me 16 plus 9, which is 25. And then we would have 85 million people in the US who are willing to take this pill. I'd also like to ask, in terms of like going to my next part, which is how often people would be taking this pill. Can I assume that they would take one pill per day, or do we have some numbers regarding this?
Yeah, so we think it's very similar to a multivitamin. So we have some information on that. So it's kind of like,
Mhm.
yes, you should take it every day, but we think that people will probably forget to take it every day. At least I forget to take my multivitamins every day. So you can assume like 6 to 7 times a week is how we project that people will take it.
Got it. So 6 to 7 times per week. Can I roughly round that to once per day then?
Yeah, you can do it once a day.
Great. So if that's once a day and that's 7 days a week, then that would be basically 365 days per year, right?
Mhm.
So 365 days per year. And then my next question, in order to, now that we know, how often they take the pill, my next question is, how will these pills be sold, right? Are they going to be sold individually over the counter? Do they have to be prescribed, or are they available in bottle form? Do we have any information on that?
Yeah, let's say that they're going to be in bottle form. And to make it easy, assume that 100 pills will be about $20. So we have like capsules of about 100 pills.
Got it. Okay, so basically, so it would be $20 per 100 pills.
Mhm.
So in order to proceed, I before I kind of take into consideration the pricing, I'd like just to just roughly do a calculation of the numbers that I previously got, which are the 85 million people willing to take the pill, and that each person will be taking it once per day for 365 days per year. Just to make my calculation roughly easier, would you mind if I rounded these numbers to respectively 90 million and perhaps 400 days? Or would you like me to stick with 365?
Well, I think one thing that you can do to make it a little easier is if you know that they come in 365 days, you could do that as well. But you can also
Uh-huh.
calculate I think your next step was to do it in bottles. So you can also probably
Okay.
think about how many bottles they consume, right? So you could do the 90 million. I think
Uh-huh.
that's okay to round. But instead of 365, you could think about, well, how many bottles is that? Probably a smaller number to do math.
Got it. Okay, that's interesting. So we have 365 days per year for one pill, and that's 100. So that would be 365 pills. And can I round that to roughly 400 pills then?
Sure, you can do that to 400 pills, but since you rounded the population up to 90 million, what
Uh,
I would think about doing is we could probably round that down because I think even though people take the pill every day, I think some people forget to take the pill. So it's kind of like
right.
you feel safe to round it down.
Got it. So should it be like around 80 million, or would you like me to stick with the original 85 million?
I think we could do 90 million, but for the bottle, might be easier to either round it down to 3 bottles. Might be an easier one.
Got it. Okay, I see. Um, okay. Sorry. So 3 bottles, and sorry, one clarifying question I have is each bottle would contain the 100 pills, you
That's correct.
said?
That's correct.
Okay, got it. Got it. Okay, so then that would be 3 bottles because that would be 300 pills per person on a yearly basis. So we have 300 pills, which would be which would cost 20 times three, basically, which is $60
hmm
per year per person.
hmm
$60 per year per person, and then times the 90 million people, right, who are taking this. So ultimately, I would get, let me do a quick calculation here. 6 times 9 would be, 54, and then we would have two zeros. Okay, so great. So that actually gets me to 5.4 billion dollars in terms of a yearly annual revenue for this lazy pill. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Mhm.
What do you think about that? Does that seem high to you? Does that seem low to you?
Yeah, so kind of just looking at this number, this is actually, I don't have anything to compare with because I'm not really familiar with kind of the pills industry, but I feel like this number is relatively high. I feel like kind of looking back at what we were talking about before in terms of trying to break even within the next 4 years, if we're generating a revenue of 5.4 billion, then we're actually generating over 20 billion in the next 4 years. My next step would actually be to look at the cost associated with manufacturing and actually developing this pill and seeing whether or not breaking even is actually possible.
Awesome. Great job. All right. So let's talk about what Moshan did really well here. So if you look at the 6 steps that we have here, and here, she did a fantastic job with each of these. So first off, what are we looking for? So in this case, as the interviewer, I just gave it to her. So I already gave the prompt, which is that we're looking for the size of the US market. So in that case, not much to realign on here, but if you're ever confused, you can always reaffirm it. Second is she mentioned that she's taking a top-down approach, which is starting with the US population and going down. And then she laid out her approach, which is very, very obvious. Like if you go back and watch it, you could actually you can actually write this down in your own paper, which is a really good metric of how well you communicate. So she said she would start with the US population, break it down by age, because she remembers that not every age will, one, be able to use it, and two, not every age will use it equally. Third is she wanted to talk about how often they use it, which is pills per day, and then multiply it by the price per pill, in this case, the price per bottle. So she only had 4 steps there, but with those 4 steps, she was able to solve this market sizing. Then she did the math. So the math here, let's talk about a couple of things that she did really well here. So first off is she rounded her numbers. So instead of saying, oh, wow, I'm going to multiply these 2 complicated numbers, I'm going to go ahead and just round this up and use round numbers. Is that okay? And of course, clarifying with the interviewer that it's okay to do that with the rounded numbers. And of course, she made no math mistakes on this one with the numbers she had. So obviously at the time, she realizes that a couple of things, oh, I should have picked simpler numbers. But this is part of the learning process of market sizing, is you're going to get a really good habit of it. So let's talk about a couple of things that I would have done a little different on the structuring and then eventually the calculation of the math of it. But overall, the answer gets super to the right part. So first off, with the US population, 300 million works. You can also use 320 million. So 320 million, because if you're going to divide the age group into 4 parts, dividing the age groups into those 4 million, if you divide 4, it's a lot easier to be able to call them 8 million per group versus 7.5 million. So you do like 8. So for example, you can take 50% of 8 million, which is 4 million, which makes it a lot easier for you to work the math with. So I always like to think ahead, is that if I think about breaking a group down one, I try to make the number above it rounded so that when I can divide it, it's usually an even number. So again, 300 also works if you're comfortable with doing 7.5. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the age buckets here. So you did 0 to 21, which is the group that doesn't apply for the pill, and you broke it up into each of these life. But the one question I would always ask is that 87, why end with 87? So in this case, it's because you want each group to be 21, and the average life expectancy of someone here, you can round it up to, let's say, is 78, or you could say 80 million for, or 80 years old for the US. So you can say that. So this went a little bit over. Again, not gonna ding you just for that one because I see the logic of doing that. But I always like to say, how did you get to the age? And usually the answer here is, I'm gonna assume that life expectancy in the US is going to be 80 years old and break it down into the 0 to 20, 21 to 40, 41 to 60, 61 to 80. So that's another way that you can do it. And then once you start going down another level, I love what Moshan did, where she said, all right, I'm not going to talk about the 0 to 21 group because they don't apply. So she remembered and she kept notes from the beginning of the case where this doesn't apply. So interviewers will oftentimes drop a hint like this early on to see if you kept up with the notes. Because if you're a good analyst or a good consultant, you're going to keep track of the notes throughout the case. So you did a really good job with cutting that out. Then she started addressing the other groups by saying, well, I only think like 10% of the older group because they probably actually need physical activity. Again, this could be an assumption that you make. And that the middle groups will only 50. So a math trick you can do here is that if you find that you're going to do half of one group and half of the other group, well, together it's like 100% of one group. So instead of trying to do half of 7.5 million and half of 7.5 million, together it's just 7.5 million, except you just throw out the other branch. But the other ways that you did the math was super helpful. And I love that you clarified. By the way, just so I know before I do calculations, do we sell these pills off the counter, pill at a time, or do we do a bottle? Because you saw how this simplified her process here was that she realized that it was done in bottles. In this case, I helped her as the interviewer to say, well, you could do 365, but you can also just do like 3 or 4 bottles, whichever one. We can overestimate or underestimate here. So in this case, sometimes it's okay to, during the market sizing, to take a break and say, great, I would like a minute with that new information to restructure this. Because I have 10 seconds to restructure my math. So in this case, she kept up with the math. Very impressive. But if you ever find yourself flustered with new information, it's okay to take 10 seconds to go through and to reorganize your thoughts. It's like, well, actually, I'm going to reorganize this. Similar to what she did earlier with the structure. You can also do this here where it's like, well, instead of doing 365 times 85 million, I'm going to go ahead and just do 3 bottles, but round up the population up to 90 million and get to the ballpark. Again, the answer itself isn't as important as your thought process through it. And Moshan did a fantastic job. And after she did step 4, which is math calculation, she asked, wait, does that seem right? And I said, yeah, that makes sense. What do you, and then I proceeded to ask her about these, and she did a really good job with making sure of the sense check. What I really loved is that she was honest. She said, I don't have a benchmark. I don't know how big a market should be for multivitamins or for fitness equipment. But what I do know is that 5.4 billion seems pretty big, and it's roughly about 21 billion after 4 years. So the next steps I would like to know is, well, if we can capture 21 billion in 4 years, what's the expected cost that we're going to incur so we can see to break even? So she did a fantastic job with step 5 of saying, does this number make sense? And then step 6 of moving the case forward by saying, this is the next thing I want to look at. So fantastic job there. So feel free to go back and rewind this one as well. And if you have any questions about the market sizing, feel free to ask it below. So I'll give you another example of another way you could have done it as well. Again, the answer itself doesn't matter as much as the approach. So we already knew this, which is that step 1 is, what are we looking for? So in this case, the Lazy Pill company wants to know how much they can sell in pills per year in the US. Second here is Moshan took a top-down approach versus a bottom-up. So the difference between the top-down and bottom-up, as I mentioned earlier, is that the top-down starts with the entire population, while the bottom-up starts with one and builds up. Like one unit, it could be one household, it could be one person, and so forth. So in this case, you could have done, oh, well, the average household probably has 3 people and they probably do this many vitamins. I'm going to extrapolate that out. So there's a lot of ways you can do top down and bottom up. In this case, the top down makes a lot more sense, because I always like to think about it as, which one are you constrained by? For example, in this case, imagine that you have unlimited capacity. You would probably want to do a top down because you always produce more. So I always like to think, is this a demand issue or a supply issue? If it's a demand issue, like, well, you can only sell to so many people. Like, people can only take 1 pill per day. You can't force them to take 14 pills in a week. So it's a top-down approach. But a bottom-up approach would be like if you have supply issues. Like, for example, imagine you're a tennis coach and you're thinking about how many clients can I actually teach tennis to? You're probably constrained by your own time as a tennis coach. It doesn't matter to start with the entire population, because if you are living in New York and someone in New Jersey wants to have you as a tennis coach, you could probably drive over. But if someone in Los Angeles wants you to have me as their coach, you're not going to fly all the way over just for a tennis lesson. So you can always start from the bottom up. But in this case, top down is a great way. And we have another resource in the guide as well to help you figure out if it's a top down or bottom up. Otherwise, we'll be here for an hour explaining it, but it's a really crucial topic. Third is structured approach. So Moshan did a fantastic job, very similar to what I thought about, which was starting with the total population, then going to the age group, then figuring out how many bottles each age group, how often they eat, and then the price of the bottle. So very simple 4-step process. Market sizing doesn't need to be complicated. And then doing the calculations here. So I'll let you pause here if you want to read through the slides. Basically, similar approach here is going through, except I used 320 million to make it easier, divided to groups of age of 80. But similar to Moshan, I eliminated the 0 to 20 group here because they don't benefit from the pill. And then from there, I just calculated how many people use the pill. So in this case, I'm a little more liberal because I personally think that people will take the lazy pill because it's kind of like they don't have to go to the gym, but they get all the benefits. So I actually think old people who are a little more at the point where they might get injured if they go to the gym, they're going to want to take the pill. So I was a little more liberal with assuming that roughly about 80% of the population will take it. Pretty much I was just more like closer to like, well, I think 50% will take it. So again, the assumption here for an imaginary product could be either way, and both make sense here. And finally, we multiplied everything out, 100 pills per bottle and $20. So I love what Moshan did, where she just said, well, 3 bottles actually equals $60. So I can skip a math step by just multiplying those together. So 60 times the 90 million equals the $5.4 billion. So if you did it my way, my calculation with 80%, then it works out to be roughly about 8 billion. But again, in the billions, like think about it yourself. The difference between 5.4 billion and 8 billion when things are of that magnitude is not as big as you think it is. So in this case, we both get to the same ballpark. And if we were both interviewing, this would both be solid approaches. And then does it make sense? So in this case, my time was like, well, let's think about it from a break even, which makes sense. So in this case, I decided to take an approach of like, well, seems like people are spending about $40, $60 a year. I think this is more than what or less than what people spend on gym memberships, protein powders, or multivitamins. So I think it makes sense. So one thing that you can do when you're sense checking is think about per capita. Well, you're saying that on average, people are spending $40 to $60 a year on this. Do they spend already $40 to $60 on similar products? So in this case, most people who have gym memberships know that $40 gym membership a year is very cheap. And this gets you the same benefit as going to the gym. So this completely makes sense here in terms of sense checking. Both approaches work. And then in this case, Moshan wanted to go straight to the break even. The another thing that you could have done was to go to the FDA. Well, we know that it's a really good market, but can we actually break even in 48 months, or can we get FDA approval process in 24? So in both cases, you're moving the case forward. So both approaches work. But I wanted to demonstrate with this market sizing that there is no one way to just solve a case. And it's all about your thought process, because if you're just memorizing frameworks, then consultants have no value in the marketplace. It's about how do you take what you have and tell the client, this is the next thing that you need to do. But what I actually want to do here is to have you brainstorm and spend 20 seconds brainstorming this question. It's like, you know what? Client really loves the market sizing you did, and they're super impressed. And they're thinking about this launching in the US, and they want to know, well, what marketing ideas do you have to build awareness for the lazy pill? So could you come up with as many ideas about how to build our brand and how to market our product within 20 seconds? All right, that's 20 seconds. All right, Sean, what did you come up with? What ideas do you have for the client?
Yeah, so that was a kind of a good exercise, and I basically decided to separate my thinking into two buckets. First, like kind of like physically building awareness, and the second one is like digitally building awareness. And so, kind of like starting with the physical kind of mechanisms that we could use first are kind of coming up with sponsorships, like sponsoring someone else, perhaps like social media platforms, and like getting kind of influencers to help sponsor our product. Also, kind of affiliate programs, kind of just other physical programs, and including like maybe setting up our kind of flyers and other forms of physical ads around kind of like in gyms perhaps, like, or other fitness spaces like fitness centers, other like equipment stores. And then digitally, I was thinking of not only kind of building an online marketing platform in kind of the form of a website perhaps, also being able to promote digital ads, but also hooking, like I guess like kind of forming partnerships with other kind of fitness spaces or like fitness companies, and getting them to help promote our product through us through their online digital platforms, in order to spread awareness for this new product that's coming.
Great. Awesome. Great job for it. And Matana already used this technique, so we're gonna go back to it. So what I really loved about this is she had a couple of things, right? So she really nailed it on the structure. So she talked about physical, so things in the real world, and digital, things that are online, as well as going through and covering the basic things like, well, could we put flyers on our own stores and so forth? And can we put flyers on other stores? So basically that covers the world, right? It's kind of like physical stores, ours that we own, and those that we don't own. And then the coverage is fantastic on that, on digital as well, in terms of things that we could do on our own platforms and then other platforms that we can leverage as well. So hopefully you came up with the ideas. So for Shana, I counted 8 ideas here that she had here. So see how many ideas you came up with. So here is what I want to do is I want to show you a technique for increasing and improving your brainstorming here. So I call this method the X not X method, and Moshan did this really well here. And essentially what it means is how this technique came into be is that when I was in college, I took a psychology class, and one of the things that we learned about the psychology class is that when you have less resources to work with, you're a lot more creative. So the joke I always have is that imagine your friend who is walking around and they have all the gyms in the world. They want to get healthy, but for some reason they just can't get healthy. And then you find out all these people who go to jail and they don't have gym equipment, the same gym equipment you have. They don't have the same diet you do, and yet they somehow become really big, really buff by the time they leave jail. And it's kind of like when you have less resources to deal with, you're a lot more creative. It's kind of like if you're stranded on an island and you only have so many things, you'll probably figure out a way to build a boat versus, well, you're living where you are, build a boat. And this is where the X not X method comes in play. And what it is you pick something, that's your X, and then you pick the opposite, which is not X. So here is what it looks like. For example, you could have done what I did, which is retail, non-retail. Could be online, offline. Could be fitness related, non-fitness related. Push, which is sales. Pull, which is marketing. Free marketing, paid marketing, in-house marketing, external marketing, partnerships, non-partnerships, free samples, not free samples, endorsements, non-endorsements, using our platforms, creating new platforms. So there's got a lot of ways that you can do it. And I would just pick one of these. Like, for example, pick online, offline. In which case, what Moshan did here. And what you'll do is what you'll find is, I have you pause this on the video, is that I want you to really seriously think about this is now and see the power of this is take retail and non-retail and actually take the time to take 20 seconds and pause this video and go through and do the exercise again. And I promise you, you're going to come up with more ideas than you did the first time. So we're not going to pause it here because Moshan's already done the X on X method, but I want you to actually pause it here, do it, come back, and tell me how many ideas that you actually came up with before and after. All right. So what we have here is that you have the X on X method, right? So if you do online, offline, you might come up with these ideas here. So here you can see there's 29 ideas that came out of the online, offline for just X on X. And this covers you for both the structure and the coverage as well. And then eventually, if you're really exceptional above the bar at casing, you're going to do offline, online, and you can notice there's two X on X here. So there's all those X non X, Y non Y. And you can kind of see here all the ideas here form a table. And this is a great way for you to, one, show that you're structured, two, show you have great coverage, and three, opens up the channels for creativity. So again, if you haven't done this, go back to the 20 seconds here, pause it, and actually do this. And then leave any questions below. But this is one of the best ways that you can do to increase and improve your brainstorming. So let's say that the client goes, great. So the client loves what you did. They love the brainstorming that you did for potential areas that how we can market. And at first they were thinking about launching in the US, but they're actually open to other locations. So what I'd love to know is, and for the purposes of this exercise, for anyone who's doing this for the first time, I'm gonna have you pause this and I'm gonna time this as well, is we are going to give you 30 seconds to look at this graph. So the client wants to know, what do you think? Should we still launch in the US? All right, 5 more seconds. So if this 30 seconds felt like it passed really fast, once you practice more exhibits, you'll be able to do it. All right, so I'm gonna pause it here. All right, Moshan. Right. So what do you think about the clients? Should they still launch here in the US, or what is this exhibit even telling us?
Yeah, so I'm looking at an exhibit that shows me 5 different markets, kind of in terms of countries and their respective kind of measures for different things. For example, average life expectancy or expected drug approval in terms of time. So I think looking at this chart, I'm second guessing. I guess I'm changing my mind in terms of whether or not we should only focus on the US, because I feel like there are other companies that have other kind of parts to them that are much better for the launching of our product than US does. For example, you see the expected drug approval in terms of months, and I see that Germany and Wakanda actually take 2 to 3 months, which is less than half of the time that US would take for this drug to be approved. Similarly, I'm looking at, for example, the monthly income, and I see that a lot of there in Wakanda, there's a much higher average, almost double the monthly income that people have than in the US. And so there's other factors like that that I'm noticing, and I'm thinking of perhaps opening our launch to other locations. Particularly, I would first want to remove Canada from our list of considerations, just because there's one huge red flag kind of pointing out to me, which is the expected drug approval in months, and that takes around 24 to 26 months, and that's mostly kind of over our limit of 24 months that we want this drug to be approved. And so I feel like we should focus our attention elsewhere. Now, moving on to the four remaining the countries that we have, I would be interested in doing some calculations in terms of, how much revenue we could generate from launching our pill in their countries, and how long that it would take, and like how that would look in terms of what the goals we had originally when we set up for this launch.
That makes sense. So it sounds like Canada is out. Of the remaining four, which one do you think is the strongest after looking at the numbers?
Yeah, so I think now that I'm kind of having more time to digest this chart, I'd actually also like to remove Wakanda. I mean, it has a lot of good aspects to it, but there's currently 0% of people who currently use the supplements, which means that we would have to do extra marketing and make extra effort in order to just get people to consider taking our pill. And so I feel like it's not a good use of our time. And I feel like instead we should um, kind of focus on the other countries. Now, taking a closer look at all of these options, I would say Germany is actually our best choice besides US, because not only does it have a kind of a good percentage of people using supplements, not as high as the Americans, but still quite high in terms of the average monthly income. It's also kind of on par with the American average income, and especially I think I should take note of is the fact that the expected drug approval rate is 2 to 3 months, which is much shorter, which means that we might be able to roll out our product in a much shorter time frame and generate more income as a result. And so, yeah, so I feel like I would want to focus on looking at Germany. And would you like me to proceed by kind of doing some calculations for that?
Yeah, we can actually. What would you do? You don't have to do with the calculation, but what calculation would you do off this chart if you were comparing, let's say, still US and Germany?
Yeah, so I would kind of just looking back at what I did for the market sizing, just kind of calculating how much revenue we could generate within a year. And now, especially since we do have information on the average life expectancy for Germany. And also, one additional thing I would look at is now that we have kind of a more specific time frame in terms of how long it takes for us to receive FDA approval, I would be able to calculate just how much additional revenue we could generate as a result of saving the time on how much time it takes for the pill to get kind of passed from the process. Yeah.
Awesome. That's fantastic. And I love the next steps of calculating for Germany, the next steps here. So let's talk about what John did really well, and we'll talk about it. So she obviously, her answer here is Germany, but walking through it, let's talk through her thought process. So even though she hasn't seen these slides before, it's been a while since she's gone through her own casing experience too. But she was able to crush this chart. So let's talk about a couple of things. So I'm going to talk about some of the tips I recommend for reading an exhibit, and you can actually see how Moshan was able to apply these directly and indirectly as well. So first is you want to eliminate data that you don't need. Like, for example, notice how until she market size, which was the next step, the life expectancy doesn't really matter here because it's kind of like in this case, we're just trying to eliminate stuff before we market size. Second, notice how she never talked about the average education level of years because again, also doesn't matter. And the population that is overweight. So whenever you get an exhibit, oftentimes there's going to be a lot of information that you actually don't need. And part of being a consultant is being able to figure out what that information that's just distracting you and take that out completely from the calculation. So in this case, Moshan did really well as in focusing completely on this right-hand table versus this left-hand table. So that's the first thing I always think about is what can you eliminate to make this table easier for you? Second is focus on the client objective. So I did this exactly right away. She's like, oh, hey, first thing I want to remove Canada because Canada's above our objective. So we can't even do anything with it right now because it doesn't hit our 24 to month period. So quickly that was eliminated. Next, she eliminated 𝗙𝗲𝗀 here because she's like, wait, there's a lot of education that needs to be done here and marketing because we haven't done anything with 𝗙𝗲𝗀 and there's 0% that they're going to do here. So you can already quickly remove this because they're unlikely to use our product unless we're doing a lot of time marketing. And of course, even if we're the first to market, if our competitors beat us to the market, or if they are second to market, we basically wasted time by going to 𝗙𝗲𝗀 because we have to educate the people on the benefits of it. Next, you can also see here is Moshan alluded to this, didn't say it particularly because she just eliminated this in her head earlier on. So you can see here in Mexico is that the average income as well as the percentage of people who use supplements is like inferior. So it's kind of like there's less income here than in Germany and US, as well as there's less percentage of people who use it. So it's kind of like Germany and the US are superior options. So you can go ahead and eliminate those as well. And that leaves you with Germany and the US, which is where Moshan ended up going with. So in this case, you can actually do two things here. You can one, determine the calculation, which Moshan didn't need to do here because we've done it in the previous section already, is that you can calculate how the market size here for the population size, as well as how many uses the supplements. And then this comes into two conclusions. You could say both markets are good. Like for example, you can go to the US market and because it's just bigger, or you go to the German market because the drug approval process is less. So again, in this instance, both answers would work and both answers will drive you to the next part of the analysis. But what she did really well is that she gave the insight, which is, hey, I think the German market is good, but we still need to validate that they can still break even within 48 months. So let's talk about that next. So notice how she's always consistently driving the case forward by saying, I would do this next. I would do this next. I would do this next. To me as an interviewer, I think, wow, if I have her on my team, I don't have to worry about her every single minute. Like she'll take care of herself really well. So I love that about the aspect of it. Great. So the client calls you and wants to know what you recommend for them. It's like, great. So the client's running out of time. Great. What do you recommend? Again, this does not mean that if you get cut off in the middle of the case, it just means that this is a natural point for you to summarize where you've had. Normally in a live interview, you would do it live or you would get a little bit of time. But for people at home who you're doing this for the first time, what I want to do is take 30 seconds starting now to write out what you would say. So sometimes in the case, you'll start now, but sometimes in the case, a interviewer will give you time to pause and reflect on what you want the recommendation to be. And other times you just have to go on the fly. So, but in this case, take 30 seconds. All right, 15 more seconds. All right, 10 seconds. All right, time. All right, Moshan. So the client wants to know what do you recommend for them?
Yeah, great. So our client approached us with the question of whether or not they should further develop and launch the lazy pill in the United States. And kind of to answer that question, I think yes, we should proceed by launching our pill in the United States, assuming that it passes the FDA approval. This is because it would be able to possibly generate us like over $21 billion in the next 4 years after we launch it, which is most likely going to break even, although we didn't consider the costs yet. The other point that we looked at was possibly expanding to an international location. And here we determined that that location would be Germany. It takes only 2 to 3 months for the FDA approval. And so there's really no huge barrier to entry for introducing this product. So that's the two locations that we were thinking of. However, I think in terms of risks, there's really three main risks associated with launching this product. The first is that, as we established before, the lazy pill is a very niche product. There's no other company that has previously produced something like this. And so I think we might potentially face a lot of skepticism from potential customers. The second thing is in terms of costs. Cost wasn't really part of our equation when what we were considering during our case, and so we want to make sure to match the cost with the revenue and see whether or not we can actually break even. And the last thing is the FDA approval, right? Can we actually get our product FDA approved? I think those are the three main questions that we have to further look at. And so in terms of my next steps, I have three. My first one would be to work on building a robust marketing platform, possibly even getting customers, generating a customer following prior to our product launch in order to just make sure that once it actually launches that there will be some kind of like an adequate customer following. The second thing would be to take a closer look at the costs associated with this venture and see whether or not we can actually break even from the perspective of both launching the product in the US and launching the product in Germany. And the last thing would be actually, in order to maximize our chances of getting that FDA approval, to perhaps gathering more expertise in order to just really make sure that our product is up to par with FDA standards and make sure that it can pass the approval process. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Fantastic. So Sean did a fantastic job here with walking through the recommendations. So let's talk about what she did really well here. So she talked about the recap, but a reminder here is that the client could have multiple consulting teams going on. So they want to know, which team are you on? So she did great. So we were on a team about the lazy pill. She's launched in the US. She went straight, her recommendation is like, we should start with the US. The reasons is that she mentioned we can bring in a lot of money. We've looked at the analysis and this is the best position to be. The risk you mentioned here already is that we haven't talked about fully the approval process or the break even, the cost yet, but she said, but don't worry, for next steps, I want to make sure that we look at these. So oftentimes in the objective for a case is you won't get to go through all your analysis or all the cases. So this is a really great opportunity for you in the next steps to tell the interviewer that, hey, I recognize that in a short period of time, we didn't get to go to all the key analysis we wanted to do. But if I had more time with you, if this interview was an hour versus 30 minutes, then I would have looked at these other areas as well. So you did a fantastic job there. So the good news here is I'm going to give you two examples of two recommendations you could have done. And you'll notice that there's no right recommendations, but Moshan did a fantastic job here, right? She recapped it similarly to what I would have done, which is you asked us to, wherever we launch the idea of lazy pill. And here the recommendation is the US. Same idea is that we think that we can achieve our target of going to the FDA process as well as the largest market. The risk here is not launching in another country. And next steps is the feasibility. So Moshan said, hey, I wanted to look at the cost. In this case, we are looking at the break even. So this is fantastic. So both responses would have been very similar here in this case. So it's very well thought out. But I also want to share this as well, is that during the exhibit, one other thing that Moshan wanted to do as well, could we launch in Germany instead? And the answer is yes. So in a case, there's multiple answers that could be. So the answer here could have been, we don't launch anywhere. Or the answer could have been here, hey, I want to launch in Germany. And this is why I want to launch in Germany. So you can see here, the recap is the same, but the recommendation is to shift into Germany. The reasons are now pro-Germany in terms of why we're doing it. The risks are related to Germany, and the next steps are very similar to the US, but it's like thinking about, can we break even within 48 months, which is what Moshan recommended that we do in the exhibit, is to look at the potential revenue and eventually the potential cost of doing all of it. So that is pretty much wrapping up how the recommendation is. And at this point, the interviewer will ask you if you have any questions for them, if there's more time, and this is time for you to actually talk to them about the results for the actual case, because oftentimes the interviewer will use a case that they are very close to and love presenting it because they have to give this interview multiple times. And if you have any questions at all on the section below, feel free to reach out. John, great job with it. So you haven't seen this case before. You did phenomenal job given that everything else. So fantastic job to her. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out and check out some of the other videos and resources we have as well in terms of helping out. So John, thanks again for volunteering to lead us through a case.
Yeah, thank you for having me today.